Kill Switch is a third-person shooter with a huge emphasis upon one main mechanic, known as the OCS or Offensive Cover System. It was one of the first games to introduce this now widely used concept, but unfortunately never received the attention it deserved. You take up the role of a super soldier who is remotely controlled through the use of a mind link. The sheer range of weaponry on offer is one of the main highlights of the game and allows the player to approach each situation in a way that they see fit. Using all of these options along with the OCS soon makes combat the real star of the show. Now visually it's not that much to look at, and when compared with some of the similar types of games on the system, it's a real shame more care could not have been put into this aspect of the experience, but that in no way deters from what Kill Switch gets right. If you're a fan of the genre and have exhausted the usual suspects the system offers, Kill Switch would make a great addition to your library. Darkwatch is a first-person shooter that manages to meld both steampunk and western influences together and presents what quite simply is one of the most shockingly underrated games on the system. You assume the role of Jericho, an outlawed gunfighter who works on behalf of a secret organization to fight against mysterious supernatural forces. Now one thing that makes him stand out from other recruits is the fact that he is actually a vampire, and as you would expect, this aspect plays hugely into the game. Each ability he possesses comes from this transformation and sees the player having the ability to produce regenerating force fields, jump extreme distances, and also single out enemies thanks to something known as blood vision. Now what matches the sheer amount of powers Jericho possesses is the range of weaponry at his disposal. From dual wielding pistols to crossbows and rocket launchers, you'll never be at a loss when it comes to tackling the hordes of enemies that come your way. If you never got round to playing this one when it released, now is the perfect time to pick it up and immerse yourself in the intoxicating world it presents. Robot Alchemic Drive revolves around several gigantic robots known as Mega Knights. These machines are the last line of defense against an invading force known as the Volgara and provide humanity with a way in which to fight back. There are several to choose from, each with their own distinct abilities and attributes that make subsequent playthroughs all the more enjoyable. The narrative isn't too much to write home about, and in all honesty just serves to provide context to the on-screen action. But what truly steals the show is the gameplay that's presented. The player essentially controls each robot through the use of a remote control, with movement being handled by the shoulder buttons. At first it can be quite tricky to get used to the rather unorthodox setup, but it soon comes into its own, and with the several special abilities at your disposal, such as lasers, daggers and mallets, it's a real blast taking down enemies once you master it. Although some aspects of the game let it down, Robot Alchemic Drive is still a respectable and enjoyable experience that is bound to satisfy fans of the subject matter. Drake in the Ancient Gates is an action-adventure that sees the player fulfilling the role of a young woman known as Rin. You set out on a journey to ultimately save the world from an ever-growing threat, hell-bent on enslaving humanity. Now the gameplay is primarily broken up into two different styles. The action initially takes place on the ground and sees the player taking command of Rin and the various abilities that she possesses. From combo weapon-based attacks to magical spells, there are plenty of ways to tackle each encounter with enemies. But further into the adventure, you gain access to a dragon, which opens the gameplay and introduces airborne combat. This quite easily is one of the finer aspects of the overall experience, and really helps the game stand out from its contemporaries. Although not without its flaws, Draken is a fine example of an underappreciated adventure that deserves a lot more attention than it initially received. Now Mr. Mosquito is an entirely bizarre experience. It sees you controlling a mosquito who has taken up residence inside an unsuspecting family's home. The objective is simple: you have to stock up on enough blood throughout the summer to survive the harsh winter ahead. In order to do this, you must suck blood from specific parts of the family's bodies, but as you would expect, it's not that easy. Each family member has their own specific pattern of movements, and waiting for the right time to attack is key to your success. If the family member is to become aware of your presence, they soon become stressed and will lash out in an attack that results in your instant death. Now there is a way to get around this by hitting various pressure points that will allow the human to relax and assume their pattern of movement. The overall concept is completely insane, but in all honesty it provides a real enjoyable experience that would make a welcome addition to anyone's collection. The Red Star takes much of its inspiration from a graphic novel of the same name. The events take place well into the future, where the Soviet Union have gained control of most of the world thanks to the newly developed magic-wielding warriors known as warcasters. As the player, you take up the role of one of 3 of these warriors, who each have their own distinct abilities, ranging from faster movements, a higher level of resistance, or more of a balance between the two. The action all takes place from an isometric point of view, and sees the player taking on wave after wave of enemies, which usually culminates in a boss encounter. This aspect simply steals the show, with each offering a completely unique way in which to defeat them. You have several melee attacks at your disposal, as well as projectile weapons in which to even the odds, but your positioning on the field and bare-bones strategy are the real allies. Now, the game is in no way perfect, but for what it presents, it more than achieves what it sets out to do, and that's offering a fun and enthralling beat-em-up that is bound to captivate fans of the genre. Originally a Flash game released on Newgrounds back in 2002, Alien Hominid is a side-scrolling shooter that sees the player taking out wave after wave of enemies by utilising a varied arsenal of weapons as well as abilities whilst trying to make it to the end of each level. Armed with a blaster that serves as your standard means of defense, it's possible throughout each level to acquire various power-ups such as grenades and shields that will help even the odds against the hordes of enemies that block your progression. To top this off, an extensive collection of melee attacks are also available, which can manage to get you out of some sticky situations or when ammo is running low. These moves can be quite gruesome in their execution and really stand out. Now, the vibrant and almost playful nature of the visuals do nothing but complement the overall adventure, and it's a shame that the frame rate at times can struggle to keep up with the action, but it does nothing to detract from what is quite honestly an enjoyable and rewarding adventure. Heatseeker is a game that shares much in common with the likes of Ace Combat, and sees the player jumping into a selection of fighter jets tasked with varying objectives that range from destroying all enemies or protecting certain points of interest. With nearly 20 jets and 40 weapons at your fingertips, it's a real joy playing through the adventure and getting to grips with the advantages that each offer. From standard machine guns, heat-seeking missiles and carpet bombs, there's a ton of options at your disposal that make tackling each encounter all the more enjoyable. Now, one aspect of the game that most players will instantly fall in love with is the impact camera. It feels a lot like what was present in the Burnout series and offers a way to view the destruction they unleash firsthand. Now, don't get me wrong, Heatseeker does have its weak points, and they are quite plentiful, but the minute-to-minute gameplay more than makes up for the several shortcomings, so if you're a fan of the genre, this one deserves a playthrough. Haunting Ground is a sort of spiritual successor to the popular Clock Tower series. Players take up the role of Fiona and her canine companion Huey. Now, this duo presents some rather unique gameplay opportunities, with Huey soon becoming an integral part of the overall game. Fiona can kick and tackle enemies, which is tied to a stamina gauge, and upon depleting it, her movements and attacks become a lot slower. This is where the various hiding spots dotted around the environment come into play, and you'll be using them a lot. Enemies are quite daunting in their appearance and manner, so sending Huey to attack or distract them is always a good idea. At the beginning of the adventure, he won't always listen to your commands, but by building a friendship with him over the course of the game, he soon becomes a formidable partner. Now, if you're a fan of the several early Capcom survival horror titles, Haunting Grounds will be right up your alley. God Hand is quite simply one of the most overlooked and underappreciated gems on the system. It's essentially a beat-em-up that mixes both Western and Eastern culture into an unforgettable experience, both in its gameplay and the narrative that it conveys. As the player, there is a huge repertoire of moves and special techniques at your disposal. Throughout the adventure, you'll find yourself unlocking up to nearly 150 of them, which can all be fully customized and assigned by the player. This is quite easily the most intriguing aspect of the game, and allows the player to essentially craft and master their own style of fighting across the adventure. At the end of each mission, your performance is rated on your fighting finesse, as well as the several objectives you'll find yourself undertaking, such as saving hostages. It's a neat little system, and really pushes the player to ultimately master their chosen style of play, as well as provide a nice amount of replay value as well. God Hand is simply essential. If you don't own it, buy it. Well, that does it for today's video. Don't forget to hit subscribe to stay up to date on future videos, and as always, thanks for watching.